Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 3rd of November 2017, a little bit after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, is Mike Robinson. And we're joined today by David Scott with Northern Exposure. David reporting from north of the border. A little bit of a technical glitch there, but we have no reason to believe that the Russians were behind that.
Well, we're going to start off with fake news, and you'll be pleased to know that fake news has been named the word of the year by Collins English Dictionary, despite not being a word, but in fact it's a phrase. So that is the word of the year. A few other words that were sort of in the running: gender fluid, fidget spinner, gig economy, Antifa, echo chamber, and Corbyn Mania were the ones that didn't make it, but apparently fake news is the one that has. So with that in mind, let's look at some, because David, we'll bring you straight in. The Russians, as we mentioned on yesterday's programme, are to set up shop in Scotland to force a new independence vote. I'm not quite sure what to say about that.
It is difficult to quite find the words. And this comes from an American senator, Senator King, right, who said that the Russians are using social media to change the reality in Catalonia and in Scotland and everywhere else, it would seem. And also from a UK Conservative politician called Damien Collins, chairman of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee. He said, "We're interested in any political activity on Facebook in the UK driven by Russian-backed organisations." So there we go, the Pesky Russians. And you know, this Russian involvement in Scottish politics has actually passed me by. There are many other involvements in Scottish politics, many of them actually quite serious, but not the Russians. But hey ho, this is what fake news is all about.
David, I think I'm right in saying that the prime source of money for interference in the Scottish independence vote was identified as coming from Berlin.
Yes, that's correct. There was a huge spike in money coming in from Berlin, whatever would that be. There are many other interesting sources of influence within the Scottish political scene. Ireland being one, England being one,
yep.
And general European immigration being one, because obviously that changes the makeup of the voting public. The Russians, not so much.
Well, look, let's just mention this from Russia Insider. The headline is Twitter reveals genial plan to identify Kremlin agents, flag all accounts with Russian text, phone number, email, IP address, and more. And they say it sounds like we're making this up, but we aren't. It's exactly what Twitter's acting general counsel told the Senate during testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee. This representative Twitter admitted that the company discovered alleged Russian election interference on their platform by flagging every account with Russian text, email, phone, IP address, and so on as a potential agent of the Kremlin. So it doesn't matter if you're just an ordinary Joe in the street, or if you just happen to have some Cyrillic text in your Twitter handle or whatever it happens to be, that makes you a Kremlin agent. Apparently this was acting general counsel for Twitter, Sean Edgett, who said, "We're looking at things like whether they're registered in Russia, do they have a Russian phone number, are they on a Russian mobile carrier, do they have a Russian email address, are they coming from a Russian IP, have they ever logged in at any time from Russia?" So there you go. If you've gone to St. Petersburg to visit, you're immediately a Kremlin agent, David. I'm not quite sure what to say about that.
And the thing that's missing, of course, is are they speaking the truth? That's not covered. I was interested to read that Pravda are apparently going to open up in Edinburgh this year, and so are RT. And that used to be called Russia Today. I don't know if you knew that. Those sneaky Russians are so cunning. They changed the name from Russia Today to RT. It's quality investigative journalism like that makes us value them.
Absolutely.
We're laughing here. The subject is humorous, but it's not humorous. Who are we laughing at? I think we're laughing at our own government here for pushing out this unbelievably poor quality propaganda. But it gets even trickier because many cities in UK have got this sort of thing. Here we are. We've got Novorossiysk Road, which is remarkably close to the UK column
office. Yeah, does that make us Russian agents?
Well, I wondered whether it would. What is this to do with? Well, of course, this is, press the wrong button, there we are. I've said from friend to foe, Plymouth recognises the sacrifice of the Russians in stopping the Nazi Third Reich, but today we're told to believe that Russia is driving the world's woes. So I don't know whether Plymouth will shortly be removing these wicked pro-Russian street signs.
Street names.
Street names, yeah.
Yes. But David, it gets better because your illustrious ex-First Minister, Alex Salmond, is in a bid to become chairman for Johnston Press newspaper group. What happens then with regard to fake news?
This is a story that's been bubbling under for several weeks. It's been denied quite consistently by everybody, and transpires it's true. So the denials were fake news. Mr. Salmond is trying to get into a chairing position in the newspaper group that has the Scotsman, which is the leading broadsheet paper left in Scotland, which has got a distinctly anti-SNP stance. So that's going to change, I would imagine. His quote here is very interesting. He says, the papers would be a champion of the community interests they represent. So we're not talking about truth. We're not talking about independent journalism. We're not talking about a separate editorial line. It's a community of interests. That's all we're really interested in.
Yep, state news. Well, there's another form of fake news, and that's by twisting the news by omission. And the prize here goes to the Times, and it's David Aranovich. Brexit fundamentalists are the enemy within. And he says that Tory Whips' clumsy attempt to bully academics shows how those who created this mess are casting round for scapegoats. So the problem is anybody pointing a finger at academia saying, well, actually, you're very pro the European Union. What this man doesn't want to go near is this sort of stuff. So we've got a report. We've chosen the Royal Society. It just happened to be this one that we came on. But in here is a report about which educational facilities have received money from the European Union, hundreds of millions of pounds pumped in by the European Union. And of course, what that money is bribery money to buy these institutions and ensure their pro-EU stance. But the Times doesn't really want to get into that.
Okay, now, of course, yesterday was the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, and that had to be celebrated. And last night, well, our illustrious, beautiful Prime Minister Theresa May was giving a speech. Here's what she said. Lord Rothschild, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Chief Rabbi, distinguished guests, lords, ladies and gentlemen, I am so pleased to be here with you tonight and to be with you, Lord Balfour, on this special evening as we mark the centenary of the letter written by your great uncle, which I believe to be one of the most significant letters in history. Now, the speech itself went on to criticise Iran and say we've got to deal with Iran. It sort of said, well, we've got to have a two-state solution and all this kind of stuff, but really wasn't terribly critical of Israel at all. Now, just so that everybody knows, here is the letter itself, and as she pointed out, what is it, 67 words in total. And of course, David, the key point out of this declaration was that it didn't give the Zionists a carte blanche to go and steal land from people that were already living there. It absolutely required that the people's rights for the people that were living there were taken into account.
Absolutely. His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use the best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which be prejudice to civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
David, just before you go on, somebody was commenting on this yesterday and saying, of course, what it didn't say there was anything about political rights, and that therefore Israel is free to do what it likes because it's, at the moment it's really only trampling over people's political rights. I thought that was a bit of a twisting of reality.
Yeah, the civil rights cover this, and the fact that the core problem comes from huge amounts of land theft, ethnic cleansing, land appropriation. That's the game that's being played. So it's certainly not in accordance with the Balfour Declaration. And of course, the Balfour Declaration, yes, hugely important for sure. hugely controversial, and the response to it has been all over the map. Mr. Netanyahu was apparently complaining to the Prime Minister that Britain hadn't done enough to honour the Balfour Declaration. Meanwhile, other people are saying we should apologise for it, where in fact it's actually quite a carefully judged, balanced document. And that was the policy that was then initiated. It was well balanced and tried to generate a peaceful society for both Arabs and Jews.
Well, of course, that policy hasn't continued, and all kinds of shenanigans have gone on since and continue to go on. And unfortunately for poor old Pritti Patel, she has been discovered playing games while she was on holiday. Well, she claims that she was on holiday anyway.
In Israel.
In Israel, yes. I just happened to be on holiday in Israel with Lord Stuart Pollack, the honorary president of Conservative Friends of Israel, and she apparently carried out some just coincidental meetings. She happened to bump into people there. No need to inform the Foreign Office, no need to have any officials there to record what was said or anything like that. So she was only on holiday. She hasn't commented on this. Lord Pollack commented to the BBC. He said, we met up for one or two things. It was the summer holidays. I just joined her for a couple of days, some drinks, some dinner, that kind of thing. They met up with Yair Lapid, who's the leader of the centrist Yesh Atid party. And he said, well, he's just an old friend of mine, a personal friend. He's more a journalist than a politician. We just had a coffee with him. It wasn't anything formal. It's all very innocent. I don't buy that for a second. What are your thoughts, David?
Well, I go on holiday to Israel, and when I go there, I drink in Putin's. So that's suspicious right away. So I don't know how much I can say about this. I'd have to say that I don't meet Israeli politicians or the journalists in there. But I'm obviously not Pritti Patel.
Okay, what's next? Inflation.
Well,
the Bank of England's inflation report is out, as we know, a couple of days ago. I kept this one for you because you've been commenting on the issue of interest rates over the last number of weeks, David. So the inflation report came out, and as you can see, interest rates raised to 0.5%. That's the in a nutshell. Mark Carnage was giving a press conference to this yesterday, the day before. He said it's time to take our foot off the accelerator a little and bring inflation back to 2%. Now, of course, inflation is at 3% at the moment, but that's not really real inflation, is it? It's fake inflation, fake news, possibly. It's been created by the fake news that's Brexit and the so-called market reaction to that, causing sterling to lose value. It's not inflation caused by consumer demand, because as The Guardian was reporting and many others, consumer demand is collapsing. And it's not inflation which is being caused by a massive availability of money, because earnings are falling for the first time in 3 years once again. So, David, I'm struggling to see how this can be anything other than the Bank of England beginning the process of ramping up pressure on people's incomes. I note, for example, that the banks have refused to pass on this rate to savers, but they have passed on the rate to mortgage holders and lenders already. And so if this, to me, seems to be only about the financial system attacking so-called ordinary people, with a view to perhaps blaming Brexit for the fact that their standard of living is falling.
Yes, I mean, you have here nothing makes any sense anymore. Zero interest rates don't make any sense. This is the great interest rate hike of 2017, so I hope everyone enjoyed it, because that's going to be about it, because it's the Keynesian economist's end point. We have interest rates screwed to the floor, no prospect of bringing them back to anything normal, no prospect of proper returns on saving, and that means no prospect of proper capital accumulation and a capitalist economy. This is, for all the talk of take our foot off the accelerator and all this pretense that they're in control, that they know what they're doing. What they're doing is completely without precedence. There's no theoretical basis for this at all. It's just a case of trying to get through the next few months and not look too ridiculous. I don't think they're doing very well.
Okay. Now, yesterday we talked about the shenanigans over the Defence Secretary and so on. And obviously over the last months and years, we've been talking about European security and defence and unification and so on. There's a new paper out on this, France and Germany spearheading a security and defence union. It's a real serious paper, David, written by, well, these two and Alex, serious people, yes, and Alex Thompson's comments on this paper on Franco-German military union written by these two likely-looking, grizzled geopolitical strategic analysts. I mean, what age are they?
Well, the lady on the left is boasting what she calls her Erasmus baby, and if viewers and listeners don't know what that is, it's part of a Erasmus program, the EU program, which is all about educating children in the ways of the European Union.
Yes. So what were your thoughts on this report?
Well, what a paper it is. We're talking about France and Germany propagating the vision of a European security and defence union. So David Ellis is correct. And this is going to involve incremental steps towards the permanent structured cooperation scheme, and more on that in a moment, joint procurement, and a Franco-German Syria envoy, because Syria is our backyard, it would seem, or our neighbourhood. Fully fledged military EU headquarters and military civil EU command structure, and all of this is based on the PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation Scheme, described by, described
wrong one.
As I can't find the reference now, described as drat, I'm sorry, I've just blanked on it.
Yeah,
don't worry, David. We'll come back to this documentation. The thing about this is that we're suggesting that the two young ladies didn't write it. They simply put the words together they were given. But this does represent some pretty serious stuff. We'll come on to this another time when we're having a look at.
I've got the quote. It's worth two quick quotes. Then. This is Jean-Claude Juncker during a speech in Prague in June this year. He referred to this the PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation PESCO scheme, as the sleeping beauty of the Lisbon Treaty. The sleeping beauty of the Lisbon Treaty.
Yeah.
And we've discovered that what PESCO is all about. It has political objectives, and the political objectives are to guarantee. Let's see now. To strengthen the EU capacity to act as a security provider and to intervene independently in the neighbourhood whenever important values or interests are at stake. And then as you look at what the neighbourhood means, it means Syria, it means the Balkans, it means the Ukraine. So what you see here is we're starting to see more of the hidden structures in the Lisbon Treaty and elsewhere coming forward. And the focus on this is not defence, but is outward projection of power into areas such as the Middle East. And that's something that's not been discussed openly in our Parliament or elsewhere.
Absolutely. Now, as we mentioned, Gavin has been made Defence Secretary. Well, is it going to end there, Brian? That's the question. That's the question that the Telegraph has been asking. A crafty coup straight out of House of Cards. Gavin Williamson couldn't possibly comment. Well, is he going to be the new leader of the Tory party? It certainly seems like a meteoric rise as other headlines are having it. We
know there's a lot of talk about an election amongst party activists, particularly with the Labour Party. We've heard that from a number of sources, so possibly.
Yeah.
Well, talking of whips, thank you very much to John, who alerted us to this talk back in 2015. And we've got Anne Milton here, a whip herself, giving a talk in one of the parliamentary committee rooms all about the role of the whips. And we might start off here. She says that basically fictional accounts of the work of a parliamentary whip can portray a mysterious world of intrigue, but what really goes on behind the scenes In reality, whips are MPs or lords appointed to help organise each party's contribution to parliamentary business. This ranges from ensuring that MPs vote. It's then got brackets and vote according to party wishes, to acting as tellers when votes take place and arranging parliamentary business. So there's no mystique or intrigue of this, Mike. This is about just making sure that parliamentary business is done. So what did the lady have to say in addition to that introduction? She said, "Tonight I may disappoint. The advert that was sent out ahead of this evening's lecture made mention of the mysterious world of intrigue to draw you in with a tantalising suggestion that all will be revealed. I can tell you much, but I am not intending to make Daily Mail headlines tomorrow. So few secrets revealed, but importantly, I do hope that we'll be able to give some insight into the times, trials, tribulations and work of the modern day Whips office." So she admits it's a secretive process and she's not going to tell the public what the Whips do. It's secret, Mike. Yeah. Very clear what this woman is talking about. She then says the expression whip has its origins in hunting terminology. The whipper-in is the huntsman's assistant who keeps the hounds from straying by driving them back with the whip into the main body of the pack. It's said that every hunt has to have a whipper-in whose job is to ensure the hounds do not stray. I don't think MPs would like to be referred to as hounds, but I think one gets the picture. Well, I think one absolutely does get the picture that the job here is to make sure that these MPs do as they are told. So let's just run on a little bit more. So the practice of getting people into Parliament for votes and persuading them to vote in a certain way goes back many hundreds of years. It's not surprising. Anyone who is leading a cause, parliamentary or otherwise, will always need to whip their followers to be effective as a group. So these people are not here for the population, Mike. They're here to run their cause, whatever it is. So let's put a bit of this in context, and we'll bring in a Tory whip, Tim Fortescue. We need him in the centre because this is an important issue. Let's look at some of her comments. You only need to go back to the 1850s when it was said of whips, they are ready to perform any trick or dodge for the benefit of their party. Some journalists could have said that yesterday. Yeah. So she admits it's still going on. The primary role of the chief whip is to get the government's business through Parliament, in particular to make sure a government gets a majority on the votes on its legislation. By 1910, whips had come to be among the best-known parliamentary figures. Critics of Parliament were prone to suggest that the whips exercised a sort of tyranny over MPs and that they had destroyed the independence of the Commons. And she then says, outrageous suggestion, but nothing much has changed since. Yeah. This woman, to me, seems to be cognitive dissonance. The whips, this is a historical quote. It is not her direct words. This is historical, but nevertheless, she makes it. The whips listen everywhere, in the tea room, in the library, and watch who is talking to whom. And they also keep watch on who the journalists are talking to. The tellers, the secretaries, had important information about who had received favours from the government. Patronage was in ample supply. MPs received pensions, contracts, assistance in elections for themselves and their friends. Another historical statement. And then this key one on the left, you can see this if you freeze the screen after the programme, but the origin of the whips is secretaries next to the Treasury. And so I'll end on this one because really I think this says it all. But whipping is also a job of management and persuasion. The stories about the techniques used by the whips to persuade backbenchers are often exaggerated, but as traditionally whips never speak about their work with regard to the truth of stories. You may have heard, in the words of Francis Urquhart, I couldn't possibly comment. The vow of silence on entering the whip's office is unbreakable. So basically, we got in touch with this lady's office this morning and said, when you made this talk, were you aware that Tim Fortescue had said to camera that Tory whips were protecting the abusers of small boys? We haven't had a reply as yet, but we're going to stay on the case. And if you'd like to know what sort of lady this is, well, when she was working with the NHS global expansion, high-profile institutions are to be encouraged by the government to set up profit-making branches abroad to help fund services in the UK. So we go abroad, find the poor, sick people, and we make a profit out of them. This is despicable stuff, Mike, despicable.
So now we have the most recent Chief Whip as Minister of Defence, Secretary of State for Defence, the possibility that some people are mooting that he may be a future Tory party leader. Well,
he's got all the dirt and the secrets on everybody else, so nobody's going to challenge him.
Just like Edward Heath.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, David, let's move on to Scottish issues and some good news. First of all, the Fresh Start Foundation. Now, this is people taking control of a pretty poor situation where the official child abuse inquiry in Scotland is really not making too much progress. It's losing personnel, has been hand over fist. And so people taking matters into their own hands and running their own inquiry.
Yes, the official inquiry lost its entire upper level of management and coordinating staff because of government interference. And they resigned, and they resigned with public declarations as to why. And the confidence amongst the victims and survivors is just not there. They've only got some 300 people talking to them, and the terms of reference are so narrow anyway. Most victims and survivors are excluded by those. It's a ridiculous situation, and we're standing up as a group of ordinary Scots and ordinary folk in the country to do something about it. So this is a people's inquiry. It's entirely independent of government, entirely independent of any government finance source. And we're going to have a process of 7 major phases of an investigation. It's going to take several years. The first one's making contact, so there's going to be 2 years worth of roadshows all around Scotland to make contact with not only with victims and survivors, though that's the primary objective, but also people who will help and people who have information, journalists, police officers, people who've had information and not being able to get it into the public domain. They'll be able to speak to us, including speaking to us in complete confidence. So we're going to gather that testimony, we're going to make video recordings, we're going to make that into a written archive, and we're then going to proceed with a report back to the Scottish people. Depending on the outcome of that, there'll then be further investigation, and we'll go forward with prosecution via a grand jury approach to decide where indictments should be brought, because you'll appreciate that particularly in Scotland, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, Police Scotland and the judiciary are all part of the problem, and we have to find some way of enabling the people to find truth and justice without going through institutions which have failed and in some cases have covered up abuse in the past. This is something we're hearing from such as retired police officers and journalists, as well as from campaigners and victims and survivors. I
mean, this is fantastic. You've got the programme published already, and beginning in March 2018 in Edinburgh and ending back in Edinburgh on the 26th of October 2019. So, you know, quite a number of events taking place over the next 2 years.
Yes, we're going to every local authority, and we're going to the big cities twice. So that's 36 events. So that's running from the spring to the autumn in both years, and it's going to be fortnightly during that period.
And as you say, the grand jury approach is the one that you're taking, and has this idea come out of the work of the British Constitution Group from a couple of years ago, where we were trying to encourage people to investigate along this way?
Very much so. I mean, this is where ideas start to have legs. The work that was done by the British Constitution Group has inspired this particular part of the process by the Fresh Start Foundation, because as we looked to, well, how do we get over the blockage that's provided by the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, blockage to any sort of justice that we were seeing in case after case. And then when we looked at possibilities, there was all the work done by the BCG and the knowledge that they had communicated to us, it allowed that way forward to be found. So it was hugely thanks to them.
Okay, now look, we're going to we're going to move on to the No to Name Person scheme, or the Name Person scheme rather, and particularly the Children and Young People's Information Sharing Scotland Bill. We're going to start off with a video clip here. This is Maggie Mellon of the No to Name Person campaign explaining how much legislation is now governing the sharing of information and raising concerns that the core idea in Name Person, which is well-being, is still undefined in law. So let's watch this and then we'll ask David for comment.
Yes, I would say I am a social worker by profession, and I still practice. I think there's very good, well, in fact, even that can be quite difficult, but the threshold of significant harm is a really important one for families to be assured that there won't be interference in their family life on a basis that's less than their child faces significant harm. When I say interference, I don't mean when a family asks for help and gets the help they want. That's not interference. But the subjective judgment of somebody else about whether there needs to be actually compulsory interference in how parents are bringing up their children or the conditions of that is really quite dangerous, I think. I think it damages trust between professionals.
Opinion on named person is well known, and that you don't. Clearly, the title of your organisation suggests that you don't.
I'm trying to answer the question about the well-being indicators and explain my position might be well known, but I would like it to be put before the committee about the particular dangers of using well-being.
Sorry to interrupt. I suppose, convener, what I would say is that I think we're not discussing whether all we aspire to is an intervention when there's significant harm. We're actually established that we want to support children and to help them before they get to significant harm. So apologies for interrupting, but you're actually not answering my question that I've posed.
Well, I suppose what I was trying to answer by saying compulsion on the basis of well-being is not right. The Parliament or the government's often said that the parents asked for the named person. And parents of children with special needs did ask for to be offered help when they needed it. That's not what the legislation says, and I think that's the fundamental problem with it. So actually asking for compulsory intervention on the basis of subjective indicators and requiring professionals to interfere is not helpful and not good.
Can we just stick to the point when we get asked the question? Can we try and stick to the point of the question, please? Claire, do you want to?
Right, David, could you just stick to the point when you're discussing this, please?
Yes, absolutely. So there was, 4 interruptions there? And that was the tone, I understand, of the whole process, where people were critical of the scheme and actually talking about the serious problems that they're facing. The committee, or rather the SNP majority on the committee of MSPs, were constantly trying to close this down, prevent this being said, interrupt, raise straw man arguments you saw there. And the basic issue that Maggie Mellon was describing there has been accepted and acknowledged within this series of hearings, that well-being is subjective. It doesn't have a legal definition. It is different things to different people. And if the state is going to start acting on this, the state will be completely arbitrary. Remember the apostle, the leading expert in well-being, described it as not a beach you go and lie on. It's a sort of dynamic dance, and there's movement in that all the time. And actually, it's the functionality of that movement which actually is true levels of well-being. Nick Marks, Radio 4, January 2012. It's completely incoherent, and yet it's been written into law without a definition.
So let's look at how they treated Eileen Pryor then, who is from the Scottish Parent Teachers Council.
To very briefly take you back to what this is all about, what it was the Act about, and it was about providing support for families. It was not about information sharing. It was not, the purpose was to ensure that vulnerable families, and let's face it, actually it's about poor families, because mostly this is a poverty issue. It was about ensuring that they had the support that they and their children needed. I'm sorry, am I saying something funny?
Yes.
Yeah, so saying something funny, David, that says it all, I think.
Yes, so you've got a circle of MSPs here, and most of them, the SNP majority, and other people such as the Green Party that support this policy, are smirking, and there's all sorts of quiet non-verbal messages being sent to the people speaking that we don't want to hear this. Please be quiet. Stop talking about what this scheme's all about. We've passed that, we're doing the scheme, and we really don't want to have any further discussion. Please be quiet.
But again, people taking their own action. So we've got NP Fringe event here, named person Fringe, NP Fringe. What they're going to be taking evidence from people that weren't allowed to give evidence before the Parliamentary Committee, is that right?
Yes, there's a lot of people excluded. You saw two people there who were part of the Noted Named Person campaign. Most of the charities and groups and individuals who were part of that campaign wanted to speak at the committee and were refused. So they've organised a separate event. They're gathering information from the public. It's been hugely well received. There's enormous amounts of information coming in. And so much so that the committee had to contact them and say that they would be delighted to receive this information if they would mind handing it into the Parliament, and that they're going to do. So you see people taking a well-organised stand. The work that goes in and building up databases of email contacts and things to make this happen has helped. And this is being successful.
Well, look, we're rapidly running out of time, so let's just very briefly on this one. This is the Christian Institute. The headline is Scots Police broke the law, sharing info under named person. And we have the Express here making the point that Scots Police hold data on 815,000 vulnerable people in Scotland.
Yes, the breaking of the law, this is a senior police officer admitted in one of these sessions in the Scottish Parliament regarding the named person scheme that they responded to the instructions that were being given. They believed that they could share information. They started sharing information around 2013 up until the point where the Supreme Court told them it was unlawful. And then they've had to change things and start to respect individual rights much more. So there was 3 years of unlawful conduct in sharing information about children by Police Scotland, admitted in Parliament. As far as the vulnerable persons database, we covered this a few weeks ago when the BBC reported there were 400,000 Scots on this database. Transpires, that's not correct. It's actually 800,000. So that's 1 in 7 of the population are now in the vulnerable persons database. So eventually, in fact, probably quite soon, there'll be more people on the database than not on the database.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, I'm sure it's passed many people by, but this week the government published the report into deaths in police custody. And of course, just to remind everybody, this report was originally commissioned when Theresa May was Home Secretary. It was commissioned in 2015 in July. It was actually finished in January 2017, but it wasn't made public. And it was written, or at least it was our friend Dame Elise Angelini, who was apparently the author of it. She had a team, I'm sure. And what does it say? Well, it says that between 1990 and 2016, there were 5,600 deaths in police custody in England and Wales, or in prison. It said that from the period 2004-2005 to 2014-2015, 47% of the people who died in or following police custody were mentally ill in some way, and it said that 82% had links to drugs and alcohol misuse. And it said that the use of police, or they actually said that the use of police custody for children detained under the Mental Health Act should be brought to an end. There are quite a number of other recommendations. It said that national policing policy, practice and training must reflect the now widely evident position that the use of force and restraint against anyone in mental health crisis or suffering from some form of drug or substance-induced psychosis poses a life-threatening risk. But of course, we've got to remember that just recently Theresa May was making it clear that the police would be expected to hold a much more proactive frontline role in dealing with people with mental illness. And she seems to be moving the responsibility from the NHS to the police, which that doesn't seem to make sense in light of this particular report. It said that the creation of the Independent Police Complaints Commission was a result of many years of campaigning for an independent body to investigate police actions. But she said that there's still a view amongst many families and those who have died in custody, as well as other campaigners, lawyers and police officers who spoke to the review, that the IPCC does not always feel truly independent of police or of police culture. I think that's something which has been widely reported over the years. She said that to ensure that the IPCC can achieve a mature and patent independence from the influence and culture of those it investigates, that ex-police officers should be phased out as lead investigators within the IPCC, and that perhaps they might be brought back as consultants, outside consultants or whatnot, but they should not be running IPCC investigations. She said that other than for pressing operational reasons, police officers involved in a death in custody or serious incident, whether as principal officers or witnesses to the incident, should not confer or speak to each other following that incident and prior to producing their initial accounts. That implies that that has been going on, which is a pretty staggering suggestion. As with civilian witnesses, all statements should be honestly held recollections of the individual officer. The further rollout of body-worn cameras and CCTV in police vans, as well as increasing availability of video recorded material, should assist. She said the trauma that some families suffer in the wake of death is exacerbated by the lengthy process, and so what we need is specialist bereavement counselling. I'm not clear whether that's actually to help the families or to help the police, but anyway, that's what she recommends. And she said that the overall picture from a number of those who participated in the review meetings and focus groups was one of a coroner system which is under pressure of resources, that coroners behave or operate in an ad hoc manner, largely dependent on grace and favour relationship with other agencies. And so she is recommending the establishment of an independent national coroner service to address the inconsistencies and fundamental shortcomings in the current local authority administered structure. So that clearly isn't working. It needs to be centralised under the control of what? The central government? I don't know. Now, David, obviously the Sheikh Obeyo case continues 2 years, 2.5 years, I guess now it is. And the question then is, will NIPI commit to an inquiry in Scotland similar to this one?
She will not. At least not so far. So with the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and the Lord Advocate isn't everything to decide, and Nicola Sturgeon is not making any comment at the moment. The Sheikh Obeyo case was a situation where there was collusion, conferring between all the officers involved before any witness statements were taken, and in fact they refused to cooperate with their own senior officer in his investigation of what happened on the night that the events actually transpired. So if we have an independent person, not a police officer, making those investigations, then that will not help if the police officers themselves are able to refuse to cooperate. And one final thing about death in custody, one thing we're finding out is the victims of child sexual abuse, if they're female, end up in the mental health sector. They end up in mental health services. The male victims very often end up in custody. They end up in jail. So if you're seeing people if you're seeing a lot of deaths in custody, you're actually seeing a lot of the fallout from child sexual abuse many years later.
Yeah.
Okay, well, David, thank you very much for joining us. Amazing information which is coming out. There were a couple of comments about those ladies speaking to that Scottish panel, how disgraceful the panel were behaving. But what brave people, they appeared, they said what they thought was correct. And of course, it's the fact that what they said can be broadcast, which makes their experience worthwhile. So this business that it doesn't make a difference to challenge politicians and others as to what they're doing, it absolutely does make a difference, particularly when that challenge is then publicised so that the wider public can see the replies that are given. Meanwhile, we're now moving on. Defence Secretary, Chief Whip, in charge of all the whips, whose job it is to make sure that members of Parliament simply vote to maintain the government's cause. The only thing we're missing is to know exactly what the British government's cause is, apart from the cause of wars overseas. We'll leave you to think about that over the weekend. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time on Monday. Bye-bye.